You can homeschool and you can choose curriculum, and I'm here to help you. One of our friends and viewers here at This Mainer Mom asked me if I would share my curriculum choices for 2020-2021. One thing that I thought would be valuable before I do that is to let you know the curriculum that I used this year and what I thought of it, and perhaps even some of the curriculums I've used in the past as a sort of curriculum review to let you know from someone who's not only seen the curriculum but actually used it. I have 7 children and I have homeschooled all 7 of them, and my oldest is 26 years old. I've been homeschooling now for 22 years. So I've used a lot of curriculum over a lot of years. The first thing that I want to say to you is that there are a lot of good curriculum companies out there. Of course, there's some that work better for us than others, and there may be some that you could argue are better than others, but there's a lot of really good stuff that even if it's not perfect, it can be tweaked. So I think the first thing to do is to just settle in your mind. You're not looking for a perfect curriculum. You're looking for a curriculum that you can make work and take some of the pressure off of yourself. We get this pressure that we just have to be perfect, and we're not perfect, and there's no curriculum that is perfect for our kids. There's no curriculum that might make them love work. They might still not love work. So we just have to get that right out of our mind, or we have decision fatigue before we even get started. I currently have 4 kids that are still homeschoolers. My oldest, Francois, is in 11th grade. My daughter, Crecia, is in 9th grade. Then I have a daughter, Yvonne, who's in 8th grade, and a daughter, Ava, who's in 7th grade. So that's 7th, 8th, 9th, and 11th grade. So let's go through what I use. For math, let's start with math. I have used a combination of Matthew C. and teaching textbooks, and I'll leave their pictures right here so that you can see, and I'll also put it all in the description box below with links so that you can go and look at it for yourself. Many people believe that Matthew C. is more advanced than teaching textbook, and honestly, that has not been my experience. My experience has been that teaching textbooks is actually quite thorough. The difference is teaching textbooks gives you a lesson every single day, whereas Matthew C. gives you one lesson at the beginning of each chapter. The other difference is there's 2 types of curriculum. There's curriculum that uses mastery, and there's a curriculum that uses cycle. Now, a cycle curriculum is going to give you a little bit of information and then about everything. And then every year it's going to go a little deeper, a little deeper, a little deeper, whereas Matthew C. teaches for mastery, so they're going to have a full year on multiplication, a full year on division, a full year on fractions, and so on. They're teaching for mastery. It's not the same as having a cycle program. So I actually have 4 kids, the 4 that I'm homeschooling now, and English is their second language. And so that's been a big part of my decisions for them. They all switched languages when they were 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 respectively, because that's when they came to the United States through adoption. For that reason, I started them out with teaching textbooks because of the cycling. I thought that would be good for them to have to keep repeating those same concepts every year, and teaching textbooks explains things in a very simple way. Now, with my older children, I had done some Matthew C. And so I was very familiar with that program, but I found that teaching textbooks worked quite well. Now this year I had 2 daughters doing Matthew C. pre-algebra and 1 doing teaching textbooks pre-algebra, and that's because I had 2 that really did want to try something different, and so I allowed it. But what I found was that teaching textbooks for me seemed a bit more thorough, and so next year they'll all be going into Algebra 1 with teaching textbooks. Now, my 11th grader was dual enrolled at a local community college in the state of Maine. You can take 2 free classes per semester at community college or college. And so he did algebra, English, history, and chemistry. And then at home he did Bible and health. And so we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But so for next year, we'll all be using teaching textbooks except for my 12th grader, who will again be dual enrolled, and he'll be taking pre-calculus. Health is something that you need to do once in high school. So we use Life Pack Health, which is Alpha Omega. We really like the health program. It's very straightforward. It's easy to find the answers. You know, you have, you read, answer questions, read, answer questions. There's self-tests, which are treat as quizzes, and then there's a test at the end of each unit. There's 10 workbooks, but with help, because it's only for half credit, there's 5 workbooks that you have to work through. So Fran did that from September through December, doing roughly a workbook a month, which was super doable. You can easily do it quicker than that. And then my girls will be doing that next year as well. I'll have an 8th, 9th, and 10th grader for the girls, and 8th graders can do high school work in 8th grade if they're able to and have it count for high school credit. It's just a very straightforward program, super happy with it. Science has been a bit more of a struggle. In the past, with my older 3 kids, once they got to 7th grade, I always use Apologia Science. So they would start with general science, physical science, and then biology, chemistry, physics, and one went on to, it was like a human anatomy, so it was advanced biology. I found the chemistry and physics to be a lot for me to wrap my head around. And to be perfectly honest, if they're able, I would really prefer that they're dual enrolled and handle that there, which is what my son Fran did this year. He was dual enrolled in chemistry. But again, Apologia is straightforward curriculum. It's Christian based, so it's going to have that worldview that God created the earth, just so that you know. But it's definitely one, it follows the same pattern of reading, answering questions, and then having labs, which we give a half credit if they do labs, and then having study questions at the end, and then tests. And if you know your study questions, if you know your definitions, and if you know those questions you got in every section, you're going to do well on the test. You might not get a 100, but you're going to do very well on the test. So once you learn the program, I found it was pretty easy to go through each book. Not easy in the sense of you're not going to do a lot of memorizing, but definitely able to understand what's expected and complete it with a good amount of work. One more thing I want to mention about science. Although I love the Alpha Omega Life Pack Health, I have bought the Alpha Omega Life Pack 9th grade science, and I do not recommend it. Some of the questions are not answered in the reading, and I know sometimes people say, well, that's a great opportunity for them to go and research, which is great. The problem is, if you have a child who struggles anyway, it really breaks down their confidence. So they don't know if they just don't know the answer or if it's not there. And it just was a huge headache. Just as an example, there was a list in one of her most recent papers that she had to do, or work pages, and it mentioned Pasteur. I wanted to know what he had done. What was his accomplishment? He was not in the book. Now, I combed that book, I underlined every name. He was not in the book. And so I didn't like that, and I'm sorry I bought it. That's been a kind of a huge disappointment because she's struggling, and we never know, does she not know the answer because it's not there, or is it because she's not seeing it? So that's been a real headache. Foreign language can be very intimidating. We've done a lot of foreign language programs. With our son Francois, we were very, very blessed to have a French teacher, and she taught him 2 years of French for free. That was a huge blessing. But with my other 6 kids, it has not worked out that way. I have used a lot of different programs. We started with Rosetta Stone. I gotta be honest with you, I hated it. And the reason I hated it was because at a certain point, you bottom out. You don't understand grammar. You don't understand how sentences are put together because it's more based on immersion and learning to speak it. But you are not immersed doing a program a half hour to an hour a day. I know people that love Rosetta Stone. We just weren't one of them. I lived in Nicaragua for 5 months. That was immersion. And using a program quickly each day is not immersion. So like I said, I've used a lot. And what I have learned, I have two of my daughters are using Duolingo because they wanted to learn Korean. And they all have Duolingo apps on their phones or electronics, and they like to pick different languages and learn a little bit from every language. That's great. But what I did make them do is if you're going to use Duolingo, which if you're not familiar, it is a completely free app. I said if you're going to use it, you're going to keep a notebook. And each day when you're learning new words, I want you writing them down in that notebook, the foreign word, the Korean word and the English word, that you have something to refer to and that you have something to study, because it's very similar to the Rosetta Stone idea, where you're building day by day by day, and you're really building quicker than you can actually learn the material. So at a certain point, you're going to bottom out and you're not going to be able to continue. So I found it worked pretty well if I had them keep a notebook of everything they're learning to refer back, to study back, or even to just, always have, so you remember what you studied. I've used programs like, they have ones that are like French in 10 minutes a day, Spanish in 10 minutes a day, and again, you're going to bottom out. So I have a really great Spanish program that I'm going to show you right now. Of course, I'll still have this linked in my description box below, but it's Getting Started with Spanish, Beginning Spanish for Homeschoolers and Self-Taught Students of Any Age by William E. Linney and Antonio L. Orta. Now, I love this. I did this myself, and I'm doing it with my 9th grade daughter this year. I love it because its goal is to immediately, or as quickly as possible in the first few lessons, get you building sentences. But I wanted to show you what I did with it, and I would do this with any program, and that's why I'm telling you about it. The lessons are teaching you Spanish, and you're translating from Spanish to English, and then the answers are in the back of the book, in case your kid is doing it by themselves, so they can self-correct. But what I did was I had my daughter translate from Spanish to English. Then I had her go to the back of the book, so if she was doing lesson 117, she would go to 117 in the back of the book, and it's written all in English, and I made her go from English back to Spanish, so she would have to write the English translation from Spanish, then she'd have to go to the English and write the Spanish translation. And then I also made her memorize every single chart. There's charts in here, declension charts, and I made her memorize those because in English, we don't have the endings, verb endings like they do in other languages, and that's something you have to get used to. First, second, third person, singular, and plural. So I would make up quizzes. Once a week she had a quiz. So we would do a lesson Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then she would have a quiz Friday. I would have every chart on the quiz that were in those 4 days, if there was a chart, and then I would pick Spanish sentences for her to translate into English, and I would pick English sentences for her to translate into Spanish. And also there's an audio piece on their website that's free, so every day she's listening to them say the sentences and pronounce them. Because even though Spanish is her birth language, she doesn't remember it anymore, so she picks it up quick, but it's still very new. This is a great little program. Let's talk history. With my older 3 kids, we used a combination of Sunlight and Tapestry of Grace. Those are both literature-based programs. Tapestry of Grace is more toward the classical method of education. I switched at a certain point over to Tapestry of Grace because I had a son who was struggling, and the Sunlight in the younger years, you're reading a ton of books, less so in Tapestry of Grace, and that was why I switched. But when you get to the high school level of Tapestry of Grace, it goes way off the diving board, and it's extremely rigorous. But having kids that have English as a second language, it was just too overwhelming. So I just kind of, based on my own knowledge of doing history all those years with my older kids, I picked some of those books, and I centered on Susan Weiss Bauer. She has a Story of the World series, and so there's one book for ancient, one for medieval, and one for early American history, and one for modern American history. And so I used those books. So what I did with my 3 younger girls is I had them do Hillyers' World History, which is really for children. But we went through that book one year to give them just kind of a broad sweep of history. And then this year what we did was we took all 4 of Susan Weiss Bauer's Story of the World books, and we went through all 4 of them, and I bought the test booklet, and so they would read a chapter and they would answer the questions in the test booklet, and we did that. We went through all 4 books in this one year. And so I didn't mind that it was actually aimed at a younger student, because a younger student would not be going through all 4. And I feel like any kids that struggle with vocabulary would have an easier time working through those books. I want them to understand history. I like to decide what's my goal here. Is my goal I want them to work through and learn to work through difficult material? Is my goal I want them to understand material? Is my goal I want them to learn to memorize? Like, what's my goal here? What skills am I trying to teach? And in history right now, I just wanted them to understand how all of history fits together. So we basically spent 2 years on world history and going through from creation to the present or close to the present. And then next year, I'm going to be focused on American history, and then I'll be focused on American government. And so we'll zero in on some of those things that are actually required in high school for history to make sure we're checking all those boxes. So I do highly recommend Susan B. Weiss, Susan Weiss Bauer, I got that wrong. And then she also has some history books, and I used the ancient one with Francois when he was doing it, and it's History of the Ancient World by her. And when I did this with my older kids, they didn't have a workbook, but now they do. Now there's a workbook that you could buy with it, and they can work through questions. It is also very rigorous, and I will say that what I was doing to kind of get through a good amount of material was I was going through those questions, and I was just picking out the ones that I wanted him to answer. I wasn't making him answer every single one of those. But it's pretty heady stuff. She has a pretty high writing style once she gets into the history, or excuse me, the high school history. So that's where we're at right now, and I haven't completely picked out what books we'll use next year for history, but I did really love those Story of the World books, and we were able to kind of zip right through them with very small amount of issues. So I do recommend those. Okay, we've gotten through pretty much every subject. Now what's left is English, and English can be a tough one because you have, if you're still doing spelling, if you're doing vocabulary, you might be doing grammar, there's literature, there's writing skills. So just, you could spend all day on English, and I don't want to do that, and I bet you don't want to do that either. Here's what I think of. I'm preparing these kids for college. I don't know if everyone's going to go to college. So far, everyone has been going to has gone to college. So I do have my mindset on that. And in order to go to college, I feel like it helps if you have writing skills. So composition is super important to me. I don't know any better program than the Institute for Excellence in Writing. I love that program. It's very concrete. If you want to look at that program, if you choose to look at that program and you're confused because you've never done it before and there is a bit of a learning curve, I want you to know you can write to me. My email is in the description box below. If you would like me to do a video to explain it, I'd be happy to do that. But it is a really great concrete curriculum that it makes it easy to grade. He's asking for certain things. It's either in the paragraph or it's not. And I have seen the results in my kids. They all did perfectly fine for writing. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. Now, with reading, as I said, with my older kids, I did Sunlight, Tapestry, Grace, tons of reading in that. But what I finally came down to is it's more important for them to learn what to do with the book than to read a ton of books. It's great if they can read a ton of books, and if they love reading, great. Those are great programs. But what I decided to do with my younger kids is I started them learning the elements of story by going to the library and getting a picture book that had a very strong, obvious plot. And we talked about characters, we talked about setting, we talked about rising action. Those kids' books, it's very clear and it's easy to learn literary skills on those books, and then we graduate to the chapter books and the books that were more on their level of reading. For example, Crecia, who's in 9th grade, she spent probably a whole semester just on The Hobbit, and I got a program online. I just Googled, The Hobbit, and I was able to find something that someone had put together for free that had questions for the end of every chapter, and she worked her way through that book. And so that's what I tend to do now, is to spend a good deal of time on one book. I tried learning language arts through literature, LLATL, last year, because I was looking for a program that kind of did it all for me, that would take them through a book and grab out those skills. But what I found is it didn't use the whole book, it only used excerpts, and that didn't really make me happy. Of course, there's other things that we've done for art, whether it's curriculum we found online or books that we bought. Phys ed, whether it's swimming at our local pool or doing some other things once a week, exercise programs, music lessons. If you have any specific questions, I would love it if you would ask them in the comment section below. I would love to answer you. I would love to talk to you down there. I do answer all my comments. If there's a video that you would like to request having to do with homeschool, please don't ever be afraid to ask. And I hope this video gave you some value. Please let me know. And as always, I hope you know that I love you and that God loves you too, and I can't wait to see you next time. Bye.